Guys, who was asking David to talk about this YouTube video?
So, what is this? Gimmick, also known as Mr. Gimmick, was a platforming game released by Sunsoft for the Famicom on January 31st, 1992. The game was only released in Japan and also somehow Scandinavia. Directed by Tomomi Sakai, it's famous for its high difficulty, great music that pushes the system hard, and the fact that it was a late release for the system, which is relevant here. Apparently taking 3 years to develop, which for the record was insane for the time, Gimmick released extremely late into the Famicom's lifespan, over a whole year after the Super Famicom released. As a result, initial interest in the game was low, and unlike something like Kirby's Adventure, which was released even later, Nintendo wasn't here to back this one up. It was received positively by a lot of outlets that covered it, but didn't see a worldwide release due to being a last-gen title and its weird character supposedly making it difficult to sell. Console transitions are exciting, and at the time people wanted something new. So Gimmick faded into obscurity. Potentially the right game, but at the wrong time. Luckily for us, the Super Nintendo is no longer cutting-edge technology. In this world, we have iPhone. So we can appreciate this game for what it is rather than what it wasn't. You play as Umihara, who is not a toy, but instead just a weird freak who looks like one, received by this girl for her birthday. Jealous about the attention Umihara receives from her, her other toys come to life and transport the girl into an alternate dream dimension with Umihara chasing right behind her. Following his exploits, you, the player, must guide Umihara through 6 or 7 trap-filled levels and find the girl's lost items to bring her back home. Or don't, you're a product of the world you want to build. Anyways, the Wikipedia synopsis is over. Let's get into the real meat, guys. I was the kid at school who liked retro. Learning about games I couldn't possibly play through random YouTube videos or the cutting room floor was like the thing to do. Gimmick was one of those games that I learned about and thought, hey, that's cool! But because I had no way of playing it, I quickly forgot about it as I moved on to better things, like Freaky Forums on the 3DS.
You're telling me these things can reproduce?
Anyways, fast forward to the present. I'm an up-and-coming high school pixel artist. You can tell because I wasn't very good. I was tasked with drawing some clouds for a project I was working on at the time. Pretty easy, pretty simple. This was my cloud spread at the time. It's my own style, guys. I don't need to improve. So yeah, basically I needed to improve, but how? What's a game with good pixel art clouds? What can I shamelessly rip off to disguise as my own artistic skill?
Leave me alone!
I couldn't possibly tell you why this was the game I figured would make for a good reference, but hey, we're a Gimmick household now. I downloaded the ROM because, yeah, a high schooler's not gonna win that fight. Saw the clouds, made my art, and life was great. Oh. So even though I didn't really have a reason to keep playing the game, I couldn't really stop thinking about it. I had only really briefly played it to look at it, but it kind of had a weird charisma to it that made me want to pick it back up. So I decided to sit down and actually play through it, and surprisingly, it quickly became one of my favorite games on the system. The controls are fun, the presentation is wonderful and full of life, and while really difficult, I always made just a bit more progress every time I gave the game another shot. It all just came together and drew me in a way I wasn't really expecting. Generally, I think it's fun to revisit games from this era from a historical perspective, but in terms of actually sitting down and playing something in full, I think a lot of these games have aged kind of poorly, and that's mostly because the industry at large was so new that pretty much anything was on the table as people figured out what worked and what didn't. I'm not particularly chopping at the bit to play something like, I don't know, Clue Land? I can respect the hustle, but it's not going to be my Thursday night. Remember, I have Freaky Forums. But despite its age, I think Gimmick's general game design is still very strong to this day, demonstrating a deep understanding of screen-based level design and what can make what appears to be a pretty simple game into something with tons of replayability and depth. And I think a lot of the game's broad appeal can be observed in just the first stage. A game's intro stage is one of the most important parts of the whole game to get right, since it's your first exposure to everything a game has to offer. You want to guarantee that the section of the game immediately gets across what you're trying to make the player feel. It should be exciting, interesting, and fun, all while being basic enough that anyone interested in the game can easily jump in and enjoy it without getting intimidated or frustrated. This goes doubly so for older games. Right now, we live in the future. There's a practically unlimited amount of games to play, and it's easier than ever to access them with next to no commitment or investment needed from the player. If a game has a lousy opening, there's a pretty good chance that a lot of people will drop off without a second thought. A lot of other titles from this era have a second challenge on top of that. Games from this time substituted game length with game difficulty, and Gimmick is no exception. Because of this, it's crucial that each level is fun to play over potentially dozens of replays. This is a game you can fully complete in under an hour, significantly less if you're going fast. There's only 7 stages in the whole game, and if you blow one of those on a disposable tutorial stage, suddenly 1/7 of your game is boring and not something you'd ever want to play more than once. And we obviously don't want that. So what works with Gimmick? Well, this minute-long, 10-screen level is super tightly designed with practically no wasted space throughout the entire thing. It's a level that both guides new players through the game's mechanics in an exciting way, while also being engaging enough for experienced players to have fun with, even though it's effectively a tutorial. Every single screen here has a reason to exist, and stands on its own merit to create a thoughtfully designed and concise intro that serves as a golden standard for screen-based level design. There's absolutely no filler here whatsoever. And that's ethos I can get behind. So let's talk about it. I'm going to break down this game's first level in likely excruciating detail and bring up anything that I find interesting that comes up along the way. The first screen of a game. This is it, everyone. This is the game's big moment. We're about to get wowed. Gimmick starts by dropping the player into a big pit. As far as pits go, this is actually a really great one, mainly because of this little block right here. The edge of this pit is just the right distance away from the game's first enemy, so as long as you don't jump over the block, you'll never be in any danger, giving you all the time in the world to figure yourself out. Let's talk about those controls. You can use the D-pad to move and A to jump. It's a platformer, act shocked. The real noteworthy thing is pressing B, which summons in Umihara's star. I don't want to get too deep into the specifics at the moment, because there's a lot to talk about with this thing, so for right now, this is just your attack. Summoning the star takes a second, then you spike it at the ground. It bounces around until it loses momentum, and then disappears. It's a little bit of an unwieldy attack, it can bounce over enemies, and if you miss, then you have to wait for it to disappear before you can attack again. There's a bit of a learning curve to it, and a lot of ways to get the most out of it, most of which you probably won't know when you first start the game. Which is good, because the very first thing the game challenges you with, besides the pit, is an enemy. The layout here actually gives you a lot of leeway when it comes to dealing with this. The initial area you encounter it in is pretty tight, and the thing just makes a fucking beeline at you. If you have the right timing, you can easily take it out and quickly move on, or if you lose your nerve and pick the wrong half of fight or flight, then you can retreat back into the pit, where the enemy gets slightly delayed by the pit's edge, giving you more breathing room to take it out. On top of that, the game makes sure that the first enemy you defeat always drops this sub-item, the pink medicine. When used, it fully recovers your health, which is really thoughtful, either helping you recover the damage you might have just taken, or providing a sweet snack for later. I wouldn't normally say that a first enemy needs this kind of introduction, since they're usually pretty simple, but these enemies actually have quite a bit more mobility than I think you'd expect from a game that looks like this. And this first section really shows off how they can pretty freely move around and pursue you. You get a pretty good idea of what they're capable of just by the layout here. Moving past that initial encounter, we get another new item, being the orange medicine, which increases your max health by 1 for the rest of the level, even persisting after you die. It's a super useful item to pick up, and since it's in a spot that's borderline impossible to miss, it guarantees you know exactly what this does for you. Additionally, there are a ton more enemies here, but you're given pretty ample space to move around them as you see fit, as well as having the opportunity to further see how they interact with the environment. Namely, these new conveyor belts and slopes. And yeah, there are slopes here. Big freaking deal, right? Well, actually. Slopes unexpectedly play a big role in this game's feel. They have a huge impact on both Umihara's movement and attacks. You're actually really heavy in this game, which kind of caught me off guard when I first played it. I guess since I was expecting something maybe more like Kirby. Unlike that, there's actually a fair amount of momentum at play, even just for basic movement, and that's only amplified by the slopes. You and the enemies both slow down and speed up accordingly based on incline, and you're actually weighty enough that you're unable to stand on even a really gentle slope like this. However, that can also be used to your advantage, since jumping when going down a slope has you keep the momentum pretty much indefinitely until you hit something, which makes any section with a lot of slopes a whole lot of fun, especially on repeat playthroughs once you have a good handle on the layout of each level. I mentioned the star having momentum earlier, and this is impacted by the slopes. This can actually be more of a problem later in the game, however on this screen it makes hitting all of these enemies much easier and more forgiving since the star's hitbox remains until the projectile itself is gone. So this thing is kind of just sliding all over the place while killing everything, which makes the earlier massive enemies a lot less threatening than they might initially appear. At the end of the screen there's a platform that's just out of reach. Try as you might, you can't jump high enough. Unfortunately, it wouldn't count as foreshadowing if I told you why this was here right now, so just keep this in the back of your mind. Anyways, before we move on to the second screen through this conveniently Umihara-shaped tube, I just want to take a little note on everything at play in this room. All of these mechanics are introduced in like less than 20 seconds, even if you're slow. The first level is ostensibly just to let the player experiment with the game's controls while being introduced to some basic level elements, but it doesn't particularly feel like that's all it does because it presents these elements in a very non-tutorialized way. It's just a chunk of level like any other. Instead of having to spend like 5 to 10 minutes learning that you can jump, the game just throws you into it and lets you teach yourself, which is way more immediately fun and makes sure the pacing is fast. Going down into screen 2, we're met with a totally different environment. We've gone from the cloudy area with these patterned multicolored blocks to a more monocolor underground area complete with gizmos. There's also these cool animated gears in the background, which helps breathe some life into the room, make it just a little less static. Animating backgrounds on the Famicom is actually a pretty big deal, mostly coming down to a lack of storage space for cartridges. Gimmick is sized pretty typically for the system and clocks in at 385 kilobytes. To put that into perspective, this picture of the Family Guy is 2.89 megabytes, or 7 times the size of the entire game. Generally, that's why I'm impressed when games from this era have a lot of visual variety and animation. It isn't just about having the skill to draw all of the art, which is tough in its own right, but also requires a lot of planning and foresight to fit all of it into the game. It's not necessarily pushing the system to its limits, technically, but it's something I'm glad they did for the sake of added character. And it's just cool, it looks cool. We're introduced to 2 new elements, being these spikes and these ceiling-attached bombs, as well as a new angle of slope. I don't really think I need to talk about the spikes. Spike equals bad isn't really like a game design thing, that's just how it is. What's important is the position of these spikes. They're in a pit right at the bottom of this steep slope. From the previous screen, we've already learned about Umihara's heavy-set build, so this steeper slope is just a natural extension of that, and when used in combination with the spikes creates a pretty natural runway for the player to get some speed to jump over the gap. And like, jumping over gaps, that's kind of our whole thing here. More importantly, doing the slide jump will also set off the bombs at the top of the screen. You can actually even see the process of them going off in real time. The closer you get, the faster these rotors spin, which is a pretty unnecessary small detail, but helps you kind of figure these things out without needing to get hit by them. Right after, we have a second similar jump. Since you have to jump over the spike, you're also forced to jump over this enemy as well, leading into the next section with another newly introduced obstacle, the ball launcher. Guess what this one does, guys. If you keep the speed from the previous jumps, you can easily glide up the slope and enter the next screen in one motion. Even if you don't, the balls won't drop unless they're fully on screen, and act consistently with other objects on slopes, giving you a decent safe area provided you take out the enemy. Or it takes out itself. Dude did not get the memo. What I think the screen does exceptionally well, and something that's really prevalent throughout the whole stage, is having these mechanics introduced in a way that looks a lot more dangerous than what the game is actually throwing at you. A lot of the danger here is, in theory, mostly for show. If you just follow the flow the level presents, you're not really in any danger of hitting these, even though you feel like you're pulling some pretty crazy looking stunts. Now, this isn't an entirely foolproof method of game design because there's a good chunk of players, especially those who are more unfamiliar with platforming games, who will second guess themselves and play the screen wrong. But what I think is most important here is the brevity in which these mechanics are introduced, because again, each chunk of level here is teaching you a brand new mechanic while not explicitly dumbing down the design of the level to do so. For example, you could extend this room and make it better, or at the very least more fair, for a first timer by separating all of the new mechanics into their own individual gameplay sections, but by doing that you extend the length of the level and make each hazard less layered, which would make replays of this level more annoying because you're spending a lot more time playing sections of level that aren't challenging or interesting in their own ways besides being tutorials. By condensing everything in this way, you're making the game a little more unapproachable, but making it a lot more exciting, which I think is a worthy trade-off, especially considering the game's overall length. I think a strategy like this works especially well in Gimmick because combined with the last room, you can grasp the basic platform mechanics very quickly, meaning that longer, drawn-out explanations of concepts aren't really needed for the player. Instead, we can focus on letting them do cool shit as soon as possible. Remember, we're like 15 seconds into the game right now and you're already doing jumps like this, which is cool. Anyways, we end the screen by going down another tube, which immediately drops us onto this slope, which is pretty much the exact same mechanic we just learned with some additional time pressure. Clearing this jump sends you right underneath this new worm enemy. Unlike Ohagi from earlier, this enemy doesn't really have a whole lot going on in terms of intelligent thought. It just kind of goes back and forth across this platform forever. It's placed in a pretty smart spot though. You can pretty easily get the gist of it without being in any danger of actually touching it. Since it's a really simple behavior, you can kind of just get it while walking by. Following that, we have another large slope, which once again mainly just uses the bombs for visual flair, followed by these two additional bombs that require you to actually juke them out unlike the previous ones. The triggers for them are pretty generous and don't really require that much finesse, and since you already know how these things work, there's no real guesswork required for this section. Taking advantage of one last slope, you can jump up to the second ball shooter, and you might notice it getting slightly pushed away. Umihara can actually interact with a lot of objects like this throughout the entire game, and I think this is a pretty good way of letting the player know they have the ability to do that, since it's likely something you'll do on complete accident, just naturally following the course of the level. You can easily push it off this ledge, rendering it pretty much harmless and allowing you to progress to the next screen. If you actually wait around for a bit, the launcher will spit out this item. It's pretty easy to miss, so I'm going to ignore it for now, but there's one more thing to mention. This room actually harbors a dark secret. Said secret is plainly visible the second you enter the room. Instead of jumping over this pit, if we go left, we can find the fireball item. When used, this item replaces your star with a projectile that launches straight forward, going through all enemies. I wonder why they picked this room to showcase it. Yeah, don't feel bad about pausing the video. I needed to take like 5 minutes after seeing this too. Admittedly, I think the implementation of this is kind of hurt by the game's limitations, namely that projectiles don't exist anymore once they're off-screened. Which, while good for making sure the star doesn't get stuck on something, makes this shot a bit more difficult to line up than I think it needs to be. But I do think this is kind of a neat little bone to throw at the player. It's a bit more work to do the snipe effectively in comparison to just huffing it on foot, but you're rewarded with a ton of extra points, and those points lead to more lives. A hot commodity for sure. This is kind of one of those things that I think makes the level more fun to replay. You can either play through by speeding by all these obstacles, or you can do this alternate strategy for more resources. Either way works, and having multiple options when progressing through each screen helps make you feel like you have a bit more agency, even if you're still being funneled through a linear path. Anyways, the next screen is a brief intermission inside of this really cool looking underwater tube. The gameplay is, you walk to the end. This might actually be the one I have the most to say about. Getting the gameplay stuff out of the way, yeah, having a visually distinct screen like this helps to cut the level into two sections. Landmarks can serve as good anchors to help the player navigate through a level, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm here now. Admittedly, this isn't really that important in this game in particular, since exploration is pretty straightforward, and I find each screen is kind of memorable by its own merits, not to mention there aren't really that many of them, but every little bit helps. It's a good indication that you're making progress, and serves as a reward for players making it this far. But more importantly, let's talk aesthetics. Because guys, look at the title screen. Realistic Another World? Yeah, it fucking better be. I think a worryingly bad and common take all throughout the gaming scene is that graphics don't matter. And like, would you guys still like games if they looked like this? Sorry, bad example. Now, just putting that claim out there without getting into the semantics of it is kind of arguing in bad faith, since the argument mostly stems from AAA games that have beautiful, realistic graphics at the cost of being boring, buggy, or otherwise uninspired. It's just that a lot of people equate good graphics with technically advanced or realistic graphics, kind of disregarding stylization and completely ignoring that a game's character is often a much bigger part in success than it might initially seem. I think it's really important to consider that half of a video game is video. Having a game with no aesthetic appeal seriously hurts the experience at large, and can even contribute to a worse game feel a lot of the time through something like poor animation or unclear navigation, among other things. You play a game to feel something, right? And man, this room makes me feel.
I'm feeling hungry.
I've already briefly touched on this game's visual style, but I think Gimmick actually goes well above and beyond the standards I'd expect for the system, and I really want to highlight that because if you remember the intro, it's a huge reason why this game stuck out to me so much in the first place. It's not that the sprite art is all too crazy, it's more just about the liveliness of it that makes it work for me. These pointless fish, these chirping seagulls, this guy who turns to watch you as you pass by, these frogs that ribbon and croak, the boss that plays dead in the middle of the fight, these enemies that can turn into helicopters if you mess with them too much, what the fuck? There's a ton of little flourishes like this throughout the whole game that add so much character, and it's especially impressive as a Famicom title. This was an era of game development where adding a 4th frame to your fish animation would literally make the game bleed. It seems minor and completely superfluous, and in some ways it is, but at the same time, it's just so overwhelmingly likable and gives the game an incredibly polished feel throughout. Like, off the top of my head, I don't know if there's another NES game where I stopped to just hang out. And not because there was any gameplay reason to do so, just because I felt like it. While I'm on the topic of aesthetics, I also want to mention the music, composed by Masashi Kageyama, because it's one of the most talked about parts of this game, even by people who don't really know much about the game itself, and yeah, it's for good reason. From start to finish, this game has an absolutely banging soundtrack. Probably shouldn't say that. Maybe we should use a different word. Gimmick contains the Sunsoft 5B chip, which gives it a couple extra audio channels to work with compared to most games on the system. It's also the only game with the 5B chip, which means that this extra audio fidelity is exclusive to Gimmick, at least when it comes to official releases. Although I think just saying the soundtrack is good because of the chip kind of undersells the actual compositions. The chip is only used in the Famicom version of the game. The Scandinavian NES release doesn't have the same hardware, and as a result, the tracks had to be altered to be playable without it. I think the Famicom audio is kind of undebatably better, but the Scandinavian version hits most of the same beats and is still pretty damn good considering these songs have to be crushed down to even work. I just think the whole soundtrack is wonderfully composed and perfectly fits the game. Even if you're not interested in playing the game itself, I strongly recommend you go and listen to the music. Even the game's unused music kicks ass. I don't know how many soundtracks can claim that. Anyways, that's enough looking at Digifish, let's get a move on. This screen introduces another new type of platform, this hanging lift thing. It's a really simple room, just hop on the platform and ride to the end. Is this fair? No, not really. But is it funny? Yeah, kinda. I'm not going to sit here and defend the first level asshole platform, but I do think it's important to mention that there's a checkpoint right on the screen, so even though this is kind of a joke played at your expense, at the very least you're not really losing progress over it. But I'm not going to glaze every single thing this game does, because even though I think this first level is very strong overall, there's a lot of stuff, especially later on in the game, that does piss me off. And I think this platform, while innocent enough, is a good segue into talking about the game's difficulty at large. So this game has a reputation for being especially brutal, and while the game is hard, I don't think it's particularly much worse than most other games on the system. Like, there are difficult platforming challenges and tricky encounters, but that's like the point of the game. It's not really supposed to be something you breeze through on your first try. It's very much an arcade-style title where you're supposed to learn level layouts and improve over multiple runs of the game. And with practice, yeah, even the especially tough parts of these levels become a whole lot of fun to blast through once you're good enough. So what's the problem? It mostly all comes down to lives. The game gives you extra lives just for accumulating points, something you're going to be doing pretty naturally over the course of the game. Like, you can't not get points, especially if you're going out of your way to search the levels. But those lives are a super finite resource, and there's a lot of instances like this platform where trial and error is the only realistic way to figure out a path through a screen. On your first run of any particular level, you're going to be losing lives like crazy as you learn and figure stuff out, and often it feels like it's for stuff that you couldn't possibly have seen coming, which usually feels unfair. But the game actually has unlimited continues, meaning that even if you fully run out of lives, you can just pick back up at the beginning of each level, and since none of them are that long, you're always only a couple minutes away from where you died at worst. In theory, you can just keep going forever until you win. But if you use a single continue, you're effectively locked out of the game's final level, and by extension, the good ending. And the game's bad ending is super limp and completely unsatisfying. There's nothing fulfilling about it at all. Now, I get what the intended design of this was. With unlimited continues, the idea is that anybody should be able to beat the game, even if they have to limp their bloodied, bruised corpse over a finish line, with the good ending being reserved for the true super players who've demonstrated mastery over the whole game. I can get behind that, I really can. Where I think the problem lies is just when checkpoints become too infrequent in moment-to-moment gameplay, and the game starts requiring you to replay the same chunk of level over and over and over and over, just so you can have another chance at the part of the game that's hard. It's unfortunate because I think this game actually starts really strong with its checkpoints. They're placed in strategic locations that make logical, fair chunks of the level that feel satisfying to overcome. However, once you reach a certain point in the game, checkpoint positions start getting a lot stingier, and that coincides with a growing lack of resources as the game gets less generous with its life handouts. As a later game example, level 5 of this game sees a pretty substantial difficulty spike for its boss encounter. You have to work your way through this pretty long and tough room before challenging the boss. This would already be a tough fight, even without the surprise phase 2 that's even harder. And if you die here, you're back to the beginning of the previous room, not the boss fight. Even if you have unlimited continues, playing the same level or same chunk of level dozens of times in a row gets dull. It doesn't matter that I could theoretically clear any challenge just by trying it enough time, when it feels like I'm spending most of my time replaying content and not actually attempting the challenge I'm stuck at. But hey, there's an infinite life generator right here in this part of the level, so instead of spending 30 minutes to get back here on a no continue run, you can spend 30 minutes grinding lives! Exciting, huh? So, while I don't think any one challenge is particularly unfair, it's just unpleasant to feel like a game isn't respecting your time, and I feel that doubly so for Gimmick because the game is otherwise really great about keeping its pace up. I don't think there's any feeling worse than playing a game for like an hour, only to fuck up and be met with the title screen as if nothing ever happened. When you're juggling playing games alongside school, work, I don't know, a spouse, it's a total mood killer, and I've dropped quite a few games because of it. At the same time, it's kind of an unavoidable problem, because if this game was much easier, you'd be done with it in a single sitting. And while I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that now, it would make it kind of a tough sell at the time of its release. I just think the skill gap between the good and bad endings is a little ridiculous, and being a little more generous with checkpoints and lives would really help to make the game a lot more approachable, while not really seriously impacting the difficulty. With more checkpoints, every challenge remains pretty much exactly the same, the only difference being that you don't have to constantly replay easy level chunks to get to the hard stuff. This does have a knock-on effect of reducing endurance challenges of especially long sections, but I think it would have been worth it to make the game less frustrating overall. Of course, emulating the game, you have a few more options. Take it from me,
The guy's basically eating chips into the microphone right now.
nobody's gonna laugh at you if you use save states or rewind. You aren't a lesser gamer if you have a full-time job and can't learn the ins and outs of a 30-year-old game. You can enjoy things any way you want to, and if that happens to be without any assistance, you're gonna get a lot more time out of this game if you really want to see that true ending. Anyways, moving on to the next screen, we have another enemy who runs straight at you once you enter the room, but you're given plenty of time to react to it and can either jump to this platform or this slope, which conveniently has a place to stand on it. Standing here also causes the enemy to run into the pipe you came from and disappear from the room. After that, it's time to deal with our good returning friend, the worm. Now, learning that your star bounces more based on how you throw it is like a ground level skill for this game that is really easy to accidentally figure out on your own, so for most players it's probably not even really a thing you'd be consciously thinking about, more just something you learn like the first or second time you use the star. However, bouncing here is actually required if you want to get rid of the worm, and we do. Because the worm is on this high up platform, it changes how you have to approach and fight it compared to the level's other enemies, who have all typically just ran you down with reckless abandon. You can either defeat it from right below with a small jump, or you could do this way cooler shot from the top of the slope. The positioning of all the elements in this room make it so a shot fired from up here will bounce straight to the worm, not really requiring much aim from the player. I bring this up because understanding the star's physics is a required skill for the upcoming boss fight, and once again, while it's extremely likely the player has already learned this through natural gameplay, having a sort of skill check here helps to guarantee the boss room isn't going to be the first time you're making use of this technique. And no matter how you defeat this thing, you'll be able to see the star bounce in accordance with your actions, which is the level kind of priming you for what's about to come later. I think it's a really good example of another very unobtrusive tutorial screen that focuses more on showcasing a fun interaction rather than being a purely mechanical demonstration of a concept. Figuring this room out is pretty fun and also has multiple solutions, so no matter how you approach, you're still learning something and enjoying the game in a way that's kind of unique to you. And this also provides more options when you inevitably have to replay this level. The next screen is probably the least noteworthy in the whole stage. You can either go straight up to fight another enemy, or if you're cool or sexy, you can do this little extra platforming challenge for the stage's second and last health increase. This is probably the most tight and precise platforming section the game has had so far, but since making things look hard is the running theme of today, it isn't really that bad at all since it's right above the previous screen. If you fall, you'll just harmlessly land on the platforms below so you can go right back up and try again. Or you can get comically unlucky and land on the one exposed spike tile. Which option will you pick? Finally, we're at the penultimate screen. We've actually got another brand new look here, taking on this waterfall castle appearance. For those keeping count at home, don't worry, I'm about to free one of your hands.
Thank God.
This is the 4th unique theme we've seen in this one level. I think the execution of these different themes works really well, because they all share the same general tile set, but each introduces unique visuals and stage hazards, giving each chunk of level its own flair. Everything in the level feels cohesive and meshed together, while also being varied and kind of fantastical. And since we're in a dream dimension, that's a good note to hit. Here, because of the visuals, it kind of feels like you're breaching the fortress of the boss, which is a little corny, but the perfect vibe you want to give off for your pre-boss screen. There's also a really useless detail here. If you take a look at the level map, these waterfalls actually line up perfectly with the underwater tube from earlier. Does that affect the gameplay at all? No. I just think it's really neat they put in the effort to make that work. It's tiny, but it makes the level feel a little more like an interconnected world. Good stuff. You can't see it, but I'm doing a thumbs up right now. The game does this for like half of its levels, and it's always really fun to see. This change in theme also brings with it the final new stage gimmick, which are these windows. Walking below these drops the stage's final new enemy type, these electric versions of the Ohagis from earlier. Unlike the other enemies, these ones are immune to your stars since they do this little electric shock whenever you try to attack them. Jumping on them is similarly useless, but funnily enough, when you stand on them, it completely immobilizes them. It took me like a half a dozen playthroughs of the game in full to realize this, which should let you know how useful it is. I just think it's really funny how it completely shuts them down. They just totally give up. But wouldn't life be better if they were dead? Well, if you have a fireball from earlier in the level, you can just go ahead and use that, but there's also this other unknown power-up in the room that's just out of reach. But wait a minute, these blocks have stars on them. What could this mean? What if I... So, this is Gimmick's big gimmick. Get it? The same star that you use to attack is also the prime mobility option for Umihara, and I think this is absolutely genius. The same quirks that make the star a difficult attack to learn also make it thrilling to use as a platform, and it's extremely well balanced in all of the levels. You'd think that basically having the ability to spawn in your own personal platform would make jumps too easy, or lead to a lot of unintended skips, but that's almost never the case. You actively need to hunt for places to use this ability effectively. Trying to use it to save yourself from a missed jump, for example, isn't really possible. You have to premeditate it. And remember how both Umihara and enemies are super strongly affected by momentum and physics? Well, yeah, that also applies to the star. So, spiking it from up high or sliding it across the ground are both valid moves and add some crazy movement utility to your kit, while also ensuring from a design standpoint that bigger skips require more intentional setups in the level layouts. This is, in my mind, one of the ideal attacks for a platforming game, because you're attacking with a platform. Your primary form of offense is also your primary form of mobility. Getting better at defending yourselves also means you're learning and practicing the skills to get better at using the star for skips. The two different halves of the game, platforming and combat, are linked together by this chain. Everything just comes together and it feels so good. It's an attack that serves to make platforming more interesting, and again, that's why we're here. It also adds so much depth to the levels where you're constantly looking for places to use it, or potential sections you might be able to skip, or needing to use the star to solve a platforming challenge. It's just a core gameplay mechanic that works so well, I'm shocked it hasn't been stolen by another game in the 30 years it's been since this game's release. Anyways, the screen ends with another precise platforming section and enemy combo. This one is actually hard, like full stop, there's no trickery here, but I think that's fine considering it's literally the last platforming section in the level. Final hurrah basically, the only thing left is the level's boss. So, the first boss is a giant version of the Ohagi enemy called Giant Ohagis.
Daring today, aren't we?
According to the manual, all the other Ohagis seem to come from this one. Boss of stage 1. And yeah, the boss will always start the fight with this attack, coating the entire stage with his goons. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of this from a gameplay perspective, because while it is dodgeable, the safe area is really small and at the absolute edge of the arena, which makes it a little hard to naturally feel out yourself. Even if you correctly make the call to run left to dodge it, there's a pretty high chance you just get hit anyways and come to the conclusion that the attack is undodgeable, which isn't true. But what I do like about this is that it's fucking crazy. Like, when you walk into the room and see this shit get thrown out, yeah, it's time to lock in. And what I really like about this fight is that it's pretty much no holds barred from both sides. Your only goal is to just hit this thing by any means necessary while the boss just rains shit down from above you. There's a ton of ways you can hit it just as long as you're putting in the effort. You can spike stars off the floor, bounce them off the wall behind you, or you can even go for this kind of risky jumping shot to pretty much end the fight immediately, which feels awesome. Pretty much as long as you're not just shooting a star straight forward, the target is big enough that you can kind of fire off the projectile anywhere in the room and score a hit, and doing that gives you way more room to breathe and set up your second attack, since the boss recoils and stops attacking after you hit it. The pace of this fight is entirely dictated by you. You don't have to wait around for the boss to give you the chance to attack it, you just beat the shit out of it as fast as you can. The game gives you a lot of options, almost all of which work. It's a really simple boss fight, by far the easiest in the game, and it's not even close. But it feels really chaotic and fun despite that, and I think that's exactly what makes it a great end to this game's first level. Wait, hold on.
This fucking guy ripped me off.
Do you guys remember that ledge I used as engagement bait earlier? Check it. So, every stage besides the last one in this game has a secret hidden item to find. If you search the level, you'll be rewarded by finding these additional screens. Getting all of these items is what's required for the game's good ending, so you don't really want to miss them. They also give a ton of points, and by extension, extra lives. Again, something you don't really want to miss. That being said, I think the places these items are hidden in is actually really intuitive and a lot of fun to find. This is a Famicom game, which aren't really known for being straightforward when it comes to secrets, so I was really worried going into this game that I'd have to use a guide, which I'm not typically a fan of since I prefer finding stuff on my own whenever possible. But since the levels are so short and dense, it's not usually that difficult to naturally suss out where something might be hidden. And I think these bonus rooms are actually host to some of the most interesting uses of this game's mechanics. Finding them is one thing, but actually collecting the item inside is often another challenge entirely, and consistently is pretty fun. The first bonus screen has a really long and pretty tough platforming section involving these moving platforms, which I'm pretty sure don't actually appear anywhere else in the game, just a neat aside, I guess. But because this bonus screen is right above the game's first screen, once again, if you fail here, you'll harmlessly drop back down, meaning there's literally no reason to ever not go for this. Unless you're just like, not really feeling it, I guess. And because the bonus screen is above the first screen, check this shit out. Isn't that the fucking coolest shit in the world? If you're interested, I strongly urge you guys to check out a full speedrun of this game. You can do some absolutely diabolical shit with the star that I never would have thought of in a million years. The amount of skill expression in this is absolutely crazy and makes the game's mechanics feel so open. Like, I've played through this game multiple times and there's still stuff to learn about it even though it's so linear. There's always something you can do to save a little bit of time or find a different way through a section. Anyways, we collect the hidden item, return back to defeat the boss, and that's officially the entire first level of Gimmick, briefly summarized by an armchair game developer in 50 minutes. You can complete the whole level in under a minute. Yeah, I timed it. Gimmick manages to deliver something that's consistently fresh on almost every single screen, while seamlessly guiding the player through all of it. There's almost no waste in this level, every single screen here has some kind of relevance to the overall design, be it mechanically or visually, and I think there's value in it being so concise. It takes seconds to get into the game to just play. Just get in there and go. From the moment you turn it on, it's such an instantly likable and unique game, and it backs it up by just being really fun to play. It's a Famicom game that feels remarkably tight and modern, especially for the era. It has a laser focus on its central premise, all while constantly providing new and exciting things for the player to engage with on pretty much every screen in every level. It's absolutely oozing with personality and charm, but none of that comes at the expense of the quality of the gameplay itself. It's hard, sometimes brutally so, but the whole time you're playing, it feels like the developers cared. Every single aspect of this game has the human touch to it. They're guiding you through this little world they've created, and it's up to purely your own skill to make it through. And by doing that, your reward is to see all kinds of interesting stage mechanics, beautiful visual touches, great music, and all kinds of novel gimmicks. Stage gimmick, not Mr. Gimmick. It is by no means perfect, but it's in my opinion one of the best and most consistent experiences you can have on the system. Or at the very least, it's one of the ones that stuck with me the most throughout the years. I just can't help but respect it for being so mechanically dense, and yet something that's technically approachable to just about anyone. even if they ultimately can't make it that far into the game. It's just such an interesting game to me, and I really do think it's one of the golden standards for screen-based level design and making everything feel unique. And that's a really cool achievement to have when you're so old. It's game design that cares, and that's something I absolutely love to see from anything I play. I think it's a game that anybody interested in 2D platformers, and especially anybody interested in making 2D platformers, should play. And that's both for learning from the fantastic design throughout, and potentially some of the missteps to ensure that your own projects don't feel overly punishing or needlessly difficult. It's always good to try and learn from something that isn't completely perfect. And Gimmick is an easy recommendation for anybody interested in doing that. Like 90% of the time. Anyways, before ending the video, I kind of just want to discuss some other tangentially related things, mostly just because I don't think I'd ever have another chance to talk about them, and if you've gotten this far, I think you'd probably find it interesting too. Or you know me in real life. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. So, I've just spent the better part of 40 minutes glazing the hell out of this game, but how would you actually play it? Remember, this game was only released in 2 countries, was a late release for the system, and is a game that a lot of people are interested in collecting and want to play. It is a hard game to find, and as time goes on, it's even more difficult to actually source the hardware to play it. I have a confession, I'm not playing this on a Famicom. Shocker, I know. Luckily, Sunsoft and City Connection have a solution to that. In 2023, Gimmick saw an official re-release on modern consoles and PC known as Gimmick Special Edition. It features a couple new modes, one that essentially just gives you emulator features like rewind and save states, while the other is a speedrun mode which logs runs to the whole game and has online leaderboards, which is a genuinely cool addition that I think fits the game well. There is also achievements which are fine for people interested in that, but they all essentially boil down to beat this level or find this secret, which are things you'd be doing regardless of getting achievements for it. It's not really adding any more gameplay, which I think is what achievements are best at. There's also some added visual fluff on the sides of the screen that I would personally rather just have off, but some people enjoy borders, and tracking your high score isn't something the original did, so there's a new feature. You can, for the record, turn these off, so no harm there. That's also pretty much it when it comes to additions. The bonus content here is seriously lacking overall. You get clean scans of both versions of the game's packaging and manual, which is neat, but this stuff was already available online in similar quality for free. This actually could have been a huge bonus if this content was translated, but it isn't. Neither manual is in English, meaning this doesn't really have much value for most people getting this release of the game, which is doubly so a problem considering this content is a selling point for this version. It kind of rubs me the wrong way that a manual is advertised while being functionally useless beyond a novelty perspective. What's even weirder is that a lot of the manual content was translated just for the game's website and not the actual game. Why do that? I pulled out a whole ass dictionary to translate this shit, and you're telling me I could have just visited Gimmick Special Edition website? Why? Gosh, why didn't I think of that? Sorry. There's also additional behind the scenes stuff that I think would have made a really good inclusion that just isn't here. Like, how about this demo tape made by the game's composer before it was digitized for the Famicom? Wouldn't this have been a cool piece of the game's history to preserve? How about including the seemingly finished but never released US prototype of the game? The only difference is the music and title screen, but why the hell not include it? Actually, the Scandinavian NES release of this game is seemingly totally missing from this version. I'm not gonna lose sleep over that because it is the lesser version of the game, but like, it's a neat novelty, isn't it? I wouldn't be complaining about all of this if it wasn't for one thing. This release is $15 for one Famicom game and like the equivalent of 2 gummy bears worth of features. To put that into perspective, let's look at famously generous company Nintendo. NES games on the Wii Shop channel were the equivalent of $5 19 years ago. To those unaware, digital game value usually decreases over time. Nintendo even upcharged an extra $1 or 2 for so-called imports. And like, to go off topic for a sec, what the fuck do you mean import? What are you importing here? A digital file? You're charging more money for a game that isn't translated? Hello? Anyways, so going by Nintendo's own 19-year-old pricing, this game should be $6. So you're paying $9 for basic emulator features and a pretty uninspiring and barren collection of bonus features, which doesn't really shift the pendulum much in making this a definitive version of the game. For the record, I do think it's great that this game has finally been officially released worldwide. It's been a long time coming, and it really deserved this treatment a lot earlier than it got it. And this is probably the best overall version of the game released, by a technicality at least. But even considering the quality of the game itself, paying $15 for a release like this is criminal. For this price, I'm expecting way more than what was delivered here. At the very least, this release makes a lot more sense on consoles where emulation isn't as readily available, but even then, I'd still wait for a sale. I bought this version on Steam for $4.49, which I'll cautiously say is worth it, especially if emulating the original isn't something you want to do for whatever reason. There were also a couple different physical releases of this version, which I think earned their value pretty much purely off the novelty of being physical media. Like, this one comes with a whole stuffed Umihara that's just absolutely wonderful, and... Hold on, let me drink this really quick.
I think worth the price of myself.
But who really needs a readily accessible and decently emulated version of the game? For my money, I'll take this version instead. Isn't the information you can find on Wikipedia crazy? So in 2002, Gimmick was re-released on the PlayStation 1 as part of the Sunsoft Memorial Collection. Only in Japan, of course. This version also includes Battle Formula, which I have literally nothing to say about, so let's just keep talking about Gimmick. It features no changes from the original game. It's as bare bones a port as you can get. Although, for a game as difficult to find as Gimmick, a port isn't really a bad idea. Or at least it probably wasn't at the time, considering even this release is several $100s now. Weirdly enough, the game actually feels pretty good here. There's considerably less slowdown than the original, and no sprite flickering as far as I could tell. It's actually really oddly smooth to play. Of course, that's offset by the fact that it's extremely blurry, the screen is slightly cropped, and the sound emulation is completely fucking wrong. All of which are deal breakers, especially in 2025, where easier and better ways of playing this game exist. Interestingly, there's this really cute hand-drawn comic of the game's intro included here that I actually couldn't find anywhere else besides this version. My original guess was that it may have been a freebie with the original game, but complete in-box copies don't include it, so I have no idea where it's from. But it's cool, and something I wish was included in Special Edition. I have genuinely no idea what the retail price of this collection was when it came out. Unsurprisingly, finding info on this release was a little tough. The concept of releasing two shoddily emulated Famicom games at full price doesn't really sound right, and also seems perfectly in character for Gimmick. The closest comparisons I can think of are the Mega Man re-releases on PlayStation 1, which are kind of bizarre in their own right, but those were budget titles that also had various additions and enhancements to them, not anywhere near as bare bones as this. There is literally no reason to ever play this now, but I just wanted to mention it because I think it's kind of funny. If you're looking to play probably the worst version of the game, here it is! Otherwise, play the 2023 re-release, or stick to emulating the original instead. The quality standards of emulation, especially on console, honestly didn't get very good until like shockingly recently, so seeing something like this isn't surprising, but is a kind of fun footnote that reminds me of how good we have it now. But what if you've had enough of the original game? What if you're looking for something fresh, something exciting, something exact? Oh, thank God. Exact Mix is a brand new version of the game that released back in 2020 for arcades, featuring some absolutely gorgeous art, a fantastic new soundtrack, and a host of gameplay changes and additions specific to this version. From what I gathered, this game isn't actually a full remake, but instead uses the original engine alongside some modern improvements to perfectly recreate the original physics. As far as I can tell from watching other far more competent people play this game, pretty much every gameplay quirk or skip was faithfully carried over from the original, which kind of ensures that this version of the game isn't really neutered or anything, which can kind of be a problem with re-releases or remakes of games. Even something as simple as fixing a bug can be a deal breaker for some, so it's good that that doesn't seem to be the case here. There is also a brand new time attack mode, which is different from the speedrun mode in Special Edition, since it's about speedrunning individual stages rather than a run of the whole game. Like I said before, this game feels perfect for speedrunning, and this implementation of a speedrunning mode actually feels a little more friendly to a lower skilled player, since it doesn't require you to finish the whole game to log a time, while also allowing you to try or practice stages you might not have had the skill to reach organically. Like, I would have been able to drastically reduce the time it took me to finish this game if I could just practice stage 5 and 6, rather than having to play the whole game to get there. It's a great addition overall. And I think it kind of goes without saying, but the new art is fantastic. Almost everything has been redrawn while keeping a lot of the spirit of the original alive. The broad strokes are largely the same, but there's a lot of little changes throughout the game that I think are mostly pretty good. Like, seriously, look at the star animation. This shit looks absolutely crazy. And we've got parallax scrolling. But I can see some people being more mixed on some of the things that were changed. There's a lot of minor edits to enemy designs, some of which are positive, like these enemies in the second level being given pirate costumes, and like, yeah, that's pretty cute and thematically appropriate, but there's also a lot of smaller differences where I kind of prefer how the original game looked. Like, even if the new art is fantastic across the board, especially from a technical standpoint, it differs enough from the original stylistically to where I kind of feel like the vibe is just a little off. I think the best example of this is the game's true final boss, which I'm not going to show for spoilers. Yeah, I know the game came out 30 years ago, but I also want you to play it, so go see the final boss for yourself. Anyways, they actually look completely different in Exact Mix, and I don't think that was really a necessary change, and honestly the newer one reads a little worse than the original from the perspective of its attacks. It's not really a big deal, but I thought it was worth mentioning. There's also, like, several panty shots in the game's opening and ending sequences, and like, come on guys, did you really think a game that looked like this needed that? I remember reading a YouTube comment that I can no longer find that these were supposedly patched out, but I have literally zero way of verifying that, and checking the Arcadia update history gave me no results. So it seems like Team Pervert scores another win. Generally though, I don't mind most of these changes just because it's not like the original game has gone anywhere or aged poorly. Since the gameplay changes are really minor, you're pretty much only playing this version because of the overhauled style, and I think it's always interesting to get a new take on a game like this. Gimmick was largely forgotten on the Famicom, meaning it didn't really ever have a chance to develop its style further. Exact Mix kind of feels like an alternate reality where Gimmick was released on something like a Genesis or a Saturn, and I think that's really cool considering the whole reason for this game's initial failure was because it wasn't. They also included the ability to swap between the arranged and original styles whenever you want, but I think you'd be missing the point to play the visual overhaul version of the game without the overhauled visuals. So, this version is sounding pretty great. There is just one problem. I swear to God, every single release of this game strikes out in a different way. Exact Mix is exclusive to the Arcadia platform. It does not and presumably will not ever have a home release. The only way you can play this game is by finding an arcade that just so happens to have an Arcadia machine and has purchased the cartridge for Exact Mix, a game that was released in 2020 for arcades. Do you guys remember going to an arcade in 2020? I don't think I really need to specify why that was kind of a tough thing to do. Now, being fair, from my research, I'm pretty sure this version of the game was fully funded by Arcadia. They have the right to make this exclusive to their platform, but that doesn't make it suck any less that I'll probably never have a chance to play it. You're asking me to pay $2,500 or more on a whole-ass arcade machine, and $1,323 on the fucking game. For that kind of money, you could literally put the real Umihara in my house, and I wouldn't think that's worth it.
He got into the fucking cold cuts again.
I couldn't even really find a way of emulating the game. There's no ROM of any kind easily available, if at all, and while some EXA games apparently have been emulated in the past, the company themselves are really quick on the cease and desist and have pretty effectively shut down any sort of emulation efforts that may have been going on. I personally think that's especially unfortunate because if you recall this video's intro, the entire reason I played this game was because of the art. I think when trying to learn sprite art, it's extremely important to be able to play the game you're using as a reference to get context as to why things might look the way that they do. Or more importantly, just be able to look at art and analyze things without something like scan lines or video compression getting in the way. Anybody who's tried to recreate sprites from a video and not a properly sized or gridded reference image should understand the struggle. By limiting the game to this release, it's doing a great disservice to the really talented and skilled people who worked on it. For like 99% of people, experiencing this game is limited to YouTube videos of CRT filters and voiceovers and sound effects. Playing the game itself to experience the game isn't even an option. Anyways, it is what it is. If nothing else, I'd love to see a clean version of the soundtrack uploaded online somewhere. I could have sworn that versions of at least a couple songs used to be available on YouTube, but looking now only leads to dead links and minimal results. And even then, the versions that I remember existing were gameplay videos with the sound effects manually edited out, which always leads to a loss in audio quality. Now, if this version of the game was bundled with the original and that was what was sold on Steam for $15, that'd be a slam dunk that would easily be worth the money. Now, I'm not an arcade, so I'm not even going to pretend like I understand X's business strategy, but surely there's money sitting on the table here, right? They can't possibly be selling that many Exact Mix arcade cartridges in 2025. Throwing it on platforms that are actually possible for consumers to purchase couldn't lose them money, right? Let's move on. And the last thing I want to mention is that there's a full sequel to this game that came out in 2024. What the fuck? Fun fact, guys. I actually had the idea to make this video 3 days before this game came out. And then I got busy. It's been a really long year. Anyways, my first reaction with this game was, oh, it doesn't look that great. Something about it is kinda, how should I put this? Banana Kong-esque. The art is colorful and well drawn, but something about it is just a little cheap. It's not really the artist's fault, considering it's a $20 sequel to a, for the average consumer, no-name franchise. The budget couldn't possibly have been that high, so I'm assuming they probably did the best of what they had. I wouldn't normally be that picky about this, but since in my opinion one of the original game's big appeals was its presentation, it's something that I think needs to be brought up. I would have really liked it if this game still used pixel art. You're primarily selling it to the so retro crowd anyways, so a sort of 90% authentic aesthetic like Mega Man 9 and 10 could have gone a long way here. I was even more worried after reading this interview with Tomomi Sakai, who had no involvement in Gimmick 2 and reportedly didn't even want his name in the credits due to considering Gimmick a finished work. Yeah, not the most glowing review from the original creator. So, is it good? Yeah! It's a very different game from the original. The developers went for a more puzzle platformer angle this time around, with the focus being more on manipulating the star and new ways to solve platforming challenges. And I think this works pretty well as an expansion on the first game's mechanics. There's a lot of pretty cool uses of the star here. They push this thing pretty far, and the game seems a lot more built around it than the original, where the uses of it were largely up to the player to find. I also like the additions of these hidden costume pieces to give levels more defined, since it feels like a natural extension of the secret rooms in the original game. Unfortunately, the star was only one of the reasons why I liked the original game, not the only one. The overall pace here is a lot slower and the design less tight. It's a considerably longer game, even with the far more forgiving difficulty, but I can't help but miss the original's laser-tight focus on being a faster-paced arcade-style title. Like, one of the things I praised earlier about the first game's first level was not really feeling like a tutorial. That isn't the case here. It's far more modern and arguably fair design, but lacks the pacing that made the original work so well in my opinion. If nothing else, I can appreciate the change in direction because it really does feel like it's trying to push the series forward and appeal to more people, even though it's not exactly what I wanted as a fan of the original game. After reading an interview with the game's director, Nicolas Istens, this really does seem like kind of a passion project, which I think is really cool. It says something about the original game's quality that despite it being so niche, projects like this can exist 30 years later. I don't think there's many other died on the Famicom games that have gotten this much modern attention. Like, we got a remake, re-release, and full-on sequel in 5 years. That is really baffling to me. He's just a little green guy, but he's touched the hearts of so many.
I wonder if my friends are coming back.
As I was reading through interviews to make sure I didn't say anything too stupid, I found a specific, slightly out of context quote from Sakai that really stuck with me. Those who were truly skilled weren't just people who were good at games. They were crowd pleasers whose gameplay charmed the audience. They knew how to charm people. That's the basis of entertainment, I think. Now, this quote was about the skill of game players in arcades. You know, people all crowding around the machine watching some guy on a level they couldn't possibly have reached themselves. But at the same time, I think that quote is beautifully reflected in Gimmick itself. It's not just about the game, it was about making something that charmed you. And I think the fact that a game like this still has interest in it at all is a testament to how well that charm stuck the landing, and also indicative of the incredibly strong game design below that exterior. It's just a game that I can't help myself from coming back to again and again and again, even if it's something that I've played front to back several times, and it still pisses me off. It takes a real skilled developer to make that happen, and something that I think is very much worth learning from. And that's pretty much everything I have to say. I could go into more detail on the game itself. I spent most of this video talking about 1 of 7 levels, there's a lot more to discuss, but I think it'd be better for you to just go out and play it yourself. And also this video is an hour long. I set out to make a 15-minute practice project, and here we are. It's available everywhere now, so the barrier to entry is super low, and who knows, you might actually like it. There's very few games that play quite like Gimmick, and I think it's absolutely worth your time. Or you can just start the game and look at those clouds.
Fuck, I'm living my life right now.